here with Marty Morantz and Michael Cooper. It just so happens to be Michael Cooper's birthday today, so another reason to celebrate. Of course, we're here today to discuss Canada's weak and vulnerable economy. Justin Trudeau squandered the good times. When the world was stable and prosperous, he should have paid down debt. He should have prepared for a rainy day. Instead, he spent the cupboards bare. Now, we have new crises, the coronavirus and the rail blockades. But even before those crises struck, Trudeau had run up a $30 billion annual deficit. Before the crisis struck, our growth had ground to a 0.3%, which is negative per capita GDP growth. That was before coronavirus or the illegal blockades. Before the blockades and the coronavirus, half our citizens were $200 away from insolvency. Before the blockades, $150 billion of investments by private sector businesses had been canceled. Before the coronavirus and the blockades, the government had racked up $100 billion in brand new debt. That's all before the crises struck. In other words, they squandered the good times and have left us weak and vulnerable going into the bad times. Conservatives are putting forward plans to eliminate waste, to restrain government spending, and to unleash our economy so that our Canadians and our economy can get working again. I now like to turn the floor over to Marty Morantz to get into some of the specific recommendations that will help hardworking Canadians achieve their goals through hard work. Thank you.
Good morning. With respect to financial management, taxes, and budget management, this Liberal government's fiscal stewardship has been non-existent. They can't even meet their own goal of maintaining a declining debt to GDP ratio. We see things like runaway deficits and inept spending decisions, some of which my friend just alluded to, a budget that is not and will not balance itself, Canadians being less than $200 from insolvency at the end of the month, the country's supply chains paralyzed because of weak leadership, which has left our country, frankly, vulnerable. Canadians deserve to get ahead and not just get by. This is why we brought forward common sense recommendations for Budget 2020 that would help people all across Canada. In our consultations, we spoke to many groups and listened intently. Some of the priorities we heard were young families and real estate markets are being hurt by the mortgage stress test. Once families have proved their credit worthiness and are low risk to lenders, they should be exempt from the stress test when going to renew their mortgage. The current system shackles them to one financial institution. Alleviating them from the stress test upon renewal would allow them to shop around for better mortgage rates. We would like to see the income tax amended to make it easier for smaller private campgrounds to be eligible for the small business deduction, stimulating growth and sustaining families' livelihoods who operate these seasonal campgrounds. We want to see a simplified tax system for the most vulnerable in our society who would benefit from changes to the disability tax credit, measures like reforming eligibility of the RDSP and DTC, and also making life-sustaining therapies such as insulin for type 1 diabetics automatically eligible for the credit. We need to modernize and be more innovative when it comes to rules around charitable giving. A capital gains exemption on the proceeds of an arm's-length sale of private shares or real estate that are donated to a charity would have a massive impact on the charitable giving sector. Not only the amount of donations, but the number of people donating to charities would increase incrementally. It's also important that we make it easier for citizens to engage in philanthropic endeavors. Despite massive pushback from the accounting industry and small businesses all across Canada in 2017, the Liberal government ended legal income splitting through dividends while calling Canadians tax cheats for doing it. We believe that exempting spouses from the TOSI rules would be an important step towards restoring confidence by small businesses in this government. We'd also like to see this government not move forward with their luxury tax proposal of 10% on cars, planes, and boats over $100,000. Members of the Canadian Auto Dealers Association explained how the implementation of a similar tax in British Columbia has caused nearly half of their members to reduce staffing levels as a response to the reduction in sales. This policy was also tried in the United States in the 1990s and failed miserably, resulting in job losses and actual reductions in tax revenues to government because of behavioral change. In a very Canadian recommendation, we hope to see this budget include relief for the beer industry by recalibrating the excise duty rates for low-alcohol beer and exempting non-alcoholic beer products. This would stimulate growth and investment in these products, as well as encourage Canadians to lead healthier lifestyles. To put it bluntly, we want to see fiscal responsibility restored in this country. Our government should show that they respect taxpayers by delivering a budget that helps Canadians get ahead while actually having a plan to balance the budget. Thank you. And now on to my colleague, Michael Cooper. Happy birthday, Michael.
Thank you, Marty. Good morning. Michael Cooper, Member of Parliament for St. Albert, Edmonton, and the Official Opposition Deputy Shadow Minister for Finance. Over the last 4.5 years, the Liberals have left the Canadian economy weak and vulnerable. They have delivered massive deficits, massive debt, and also massive waste in the form of handouts to Liberal corporate friends. The list is a long one: $50 million to MasterCard, $40 million to BlackBerry, $12 million to Loblaws, and that is just scratching the surface. So in an effort to rein in spending that is out of control and restore fiscal responsibility, as a starting point, we would end Liberal corporate welfare. And I should note that that recommendation was adopted by the majority of the Finance Committee and is a key recommendation in the Finance Committee's pre-budget report. While the Liberals have rewarded their friends, they have declared war on Canada's most vital economic sector, that being the energy sector, which has resulted in a loss of competitiveness. It's driven away investment and resulted in job losses. Over $150 billion in capital projects in the energy sector have been canceled since the Liberals came to power. Just a week and a half ago, we saw the latest project, the Tech Mine project, canceled, a project that would have resulted in 2,500 construction jobs, 7,000 permanent jobs, and more than $70 billion in additional tax revenue. Now today, that project is gone, over, canceled. The root of the problem that we heard from witnesses before the Finance Committee is regulatory uncertainty. And so in order to address that issue and to restore investor confidence, we as a starting point would repeal the No Pipelines Bill C-69 so that we can build pipelines to Tidewater in Canada instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build pipelines in jurisdictions like Azerbaijan, which the Liberals have funded through the Asian Infrastructure Bank, as well as the repeal of the tanker ban, Bill C-48. In addition, we would propose measures to increase and see a return of investment, such as an accelerated capital cost allowance regime comparable to that offered to the manufacturing sector during the 2018 fall economic update. Now, while the Liberals have been less than helpful to the energy sector, they've also made life more difficult for small businesses, which are responsible for 70% of private sector employment. We've seen this through unfair small business tax changes, but beyond that, we've seen it through punitive CPP tax hikes that are going to result in an increase in payroll taxes, resulting in less capital for small businesses to invest, grow, and create jobs with very little benefit, no benefit until 40 years. So to support small businesses, we would recommend a repeal of the CPP tax hikes, which are unfair and which are punitive towards small businesses. In addition to that, there's a competitiveness gap that this country faces. This is something that the Liberals have recognized. The problem is that they've done nothing to act upon it. So as a starting point, we would do what the Liberals committed to do in the fall economic update of 2018, which is to legislate economic growth and competitiveness factors for regulator mandates. The Liberals promised it, but they haven't delivered. We would deliver. But we would go beyond that. In order to unleash small business and the private sector, we would work to eliminate regulations that are strangling small businesses in this country. In that regard, we would propose a 2-for-1 rule. In other words, for every new regulation, we would require the repeal of 2 regulations. This would build upon the legislated 1-for-1 rule, which came out of the Red Tape Reduction Action Plan of 2012. But it is also something that has been successfully implemented in other jurisdictions, including in the province of Manitoba, and most significantly by our largest competitor, that being the United States. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. Happy birthday, Mr.
Thank you.
Cooper. On passe aux questions. Michael Coutard, Global News.
Thank you to whoever wants to answer this. What do you want to see in the upcoming budget that will specifically address industries that are being hit hard by the blockades and COVID-19?
We want to unleash the economy, eliminate unnecessary regulatory red tape and anti-development laws so businesses can build more, hire more, and do more. We want to lower taxes so that entrepreneurs have more money to reinvest in hiring workers and buying and building machinery. And we want the government to get off the backs of the Canadian economy and the Canadian worker so people can generate the wealth and grow our economy.
With all due respect, that didn't really answer the question, so I'll ask it differently. What do you think has been the issue with this government and maybe the lack of fiscal wiggle room that could see a negative impact by things like COVID-19 and the rail blockades?
Well, they spent the cupboard bare in the good times. And now we face a crisis, and we have nothing left with which to take on that crisis. The rainy day has arrived, and there's nothing left in the cupboard. We warned the government during the good global economic times to pay off debt, run surpluses, and prepare for the inevitable crises that would come. Well, those crises may now have arrived. With an international virus and local blockades the government enabled, we now have economic problems, but we have no surplus with which to cushion ourselves against those problems. What we need now is a government that can protect Canada's finances through fiscal responsibility and unleash our economy by eliminating red tape, anti-development laws, lowering taxes, and unleashing free enterprise.
Canadian Press.
The government has put an emphasis on infrastructure spending. What is your outlook on that, and would that continue under a Conservative government?
Well, there's lots of spending, but not a lot of building. And there's a big difference between the two. There's no question that in every single policy area, the Liberals have big price tags. But they don't have big results. Their programs are expensive, but they don't deliver for the people. In fact, we put forward a very benign motion the other day to ask the Auditor General to audit the $180 billion infrastructure plan. Now, we would have thought the government would have been thrilled to support that motion if it were so proud of all of the projects it had built with that money. But in fact, they voted against it. We know why, because while they're shoveling a lot of money out the door, that money is not converting into real projects and real results on the ground. We've got to stop judging the success of government by how expensive it can be. No other business, no other sector in the real world would judge its success that way. No restaurant would say, we have the best restaurant in town. How do we know? Because we're the most expensive. The restaurant judges its success by what it puts on your plate and the service it delivers to the customers who walk in the door. But this government is not delivering anything for the very expensive projects and very expensive programs it has assembled. The money is being gobbled up by interest groups, bureaucracy, and corporate insiders rather than building projects that improve people's lives.
Cutting spending is a priority you've outlined. Precisely what would you cut? Where would you scale back, and how much would you scale back?
Well, to start with, we said in our press conference we would cut corporate welfare. These are the big fat checks written to corporate insiders like Loblaws, Bombardier being one of the worst examples, the handout to BlackBerry and to MasterCard. These government handouts do nothing to create jobs. They put the money in the pockets of wealthy shareholders and executives at the expense of workers and taxpayers. We would eliminate those handouts and use the savings to cut taxes for all entrepreneurs. Secondly, we bring in the pay-as-you-go principle, which says that every time the government institutes a new dollar of spending, it must find a dollar of savings to pay for it. That would bring new discipline. It would require government look within its own wallet for money, rather than just assuming it can pass new costs on to taxpayers in future generations. And finally, we would legislate a cap on government spending growth at inflation and population growth combined.
Do we have round two with
Yeah.
Michael Couta?
I just want to be clear about something about the upcoming budget. Do you or don't you want to see special measures in there now? Because one would think that the federal government will have to have some for the country to deal with COVID-19.
I've just listed when you asked the question the first time, I answered it by saying that yes, we do believe that we need to lower taxes, eliminate regulatory red tape.
That doesn't exactly address COVID-19, though. In all
actually,
fairness,
in fairness, it might not address it the way you want to address it. You might want to address it through big fat government programs. We're conservatives, so we don't believe in that. We believe in free enterprise. We believe in unleashing the economy by removing the anti-development red tape the government has put in the way and by lowering taxes for entrepreneurs and workers. Now, you might think that's not a response to the weak economy because you think the solution is a big fat government spending program. That's wrong. We know that deficit spending doesn't grow the economy. If it did, we wouldn't have had 0.3% economic growth in the last quarter of 2019 at the same time as we had a $30 billion deficit. The deficits do not grow the economy. In fact, the opposite. So our response is yes, we do need to stimulate the economy through free enterprise, low taxes, and less red tape.
just as a follow-up, don't really appreciate you singling me out as I'm just asking questions about it. However, you just went through an election where deficit spending was not one of the major issues, and Canadians decided that they thought that the way the Liberal government was going was good enough to give them at least a second mandate. Why do you continue to go after the spending when Canadians didn't seem to care about it in the last election?
Well, which party got the most votes in the last election?
I mean, if you want me to answer the question, there's a party that's in power now, and
Yeah,
I don't want to.
You're not
I
answering
don't want
the
to
question.
argue this with you in the National Press Theatre, sir. But I'm just trying to ask you, why do you continue to go after that issue when that's not what won the election for the Conservatives in the last election?
Your question is wrong, because the premise of your question is false. You said that the Canadian people rejected our approach to fiscal responsibility. Of course, we got the most votes in the last election, and we did so with a reasonable plan to phase out the deficit. And remember, people voted for us with that plan. To suggest that we should come here now and throw our platform out the window, the platform for which the most Canadians voted, would be irresponsible. We would be breaking our word to the Canadian people if we did that. So, and furthermore, it's dangerous and irresponsible for the government to pile up $30 billion in new debt every year, even before the crises hit. It renders our economy weaker and more vulnerable, the opposite of what we should seek.
We have an encore from Jim as well.
Some investors are saying, rather conservative ones like J.P. Morgan are saying, look, it's time to think about the future and moving away from fossil fuels, embracing the green economy. That's where the money is. That's where the profits will be in the future. What do you say to that in this context?
Well, I mean, I don't know why you say J.P. Morgan is a conservative organization. I mean, often these investment banking outfits favor big government spending programs because they're the ones that make money off of interest on the debt. They're the ones that get to play in all of these corporate welfare schemes. They're the ones that often benefit from big, complicated government schemes that come at the expense of everyday working people. So just because investment bankers on Wall Street want something doesn't mean that it is the job of government to follow their demands. As for the prediction that they've been making that oil and gas is a thing of the past, let's just keep in mind that right now the world consumes 100 million barrels of oil per day. According to the International Energy Agency, it will continue to consume between 100 million and 60 million barrels a day right through for the next 2 decades. So the question is, where is that oil going to come from? Now, Justin Trudeau thinks that the global oil supply should come from Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Venezuela. We think it should come from Canada. Why? Because we have the cleanest and greenest energy sector in the world, because we have the most responsible sector, because the revenues from that sector go to create jobs, to lift Indigenous people out of poverty, to fund schools and hospitals, and not to fund dictatorships and human rights abuses around the world.
In terms of fundamentals, you know, the government will say, well, look, unemployment nationally is relatively low. Debt to GDP ratio is sustainable. They have a cushion to deal with crises like COVID-19. What do you say to that?
Well, what cushion do they have? We had a $30 billion deficit, which is about 25% bigger than they promised just last budget, before the COVID-19 and the rail blockades even began. So there is no cushion. They eliminated the cushion long ago, and they put us in a place of weakness and vulnerability as we face these two crises. Conservatives would have controlled spending in the good times to prepare for the bad times. Now the bad times have come. Our warnings have proven right. And as a result, we think that it's time to take a different direction. That direction is to protect our finances and unleash the economy.
Monsieur Poilievre, si je peux me permettre, avez-vous décidé qui vous allez appuyer dans la course à la chefferie conservatrice? Allez-vous appuyer quelqu'un?
Je n'ai pas de plan pour ça.
C'est pas déterminé encore. Merci.
Excellent, merci.